Hi everybody, we're back.
Right.
Quick
As I
swap
was
of
saying.
screens. As you were saying.
Yeah. I came up with this starting sentence for a crime novel, which was, roughly speaking, the small grey-haired woman grimaced as she pulled a shopping trolley into the police station carrying her husband's head. And that won. I won some chocolates, a very useful 3 a.m. notebook for jotting down ideas that occur to you in the small hours. And somebody said, well, I can't wait to read the rest. So I guess I had a kind of obligation to finish writing the novel, which I duly did. I got a very helpful critique from Louise Voss on Crime Fiction Coach, and then revised it, sent it out to publishers and agents, and eventually, because I think everybody knows it's a pretty long process, it very rarely happens instantly. Hobeck Books asked for the full manuscript, they read it, and then offered to publish it. And as I say, it comes out on the 14th of September.
Which is excellent. We've got some people joining us. Laura says we're back. Yay! We are back, Laura. We just had to swap streams. So currently Sam's hosting us, which is really nice of her, because she's had a busy week. So good to be back. So this is part chat about your book and part ask the expert. So if anyone has any questions about science in crime novels, now's a chance to ask someone who's both a chartered chemist and a chartered biologist. Any questions? Why is it important, do you think, to get the science right in a...
I think you can derail a plot if something crucial depends on something that's scientifically incorrect, like misunderstanding which chromosomes a particular bit of DNA might be on, or something to do with a poison that wouldn't work or would work too quickly, or knocking somebody out in a way in which you can't practically do it. It just derails the whole thing, and you think, well, from here on, things aren't going to happen the way the author wants them to. And many of these mistakes are reasonably simple to avoid. You don't need a degree to write science in crime novels accurately. There are sources out there. I wrote the book Crime Writing: How to Write the Science to help people do that. And I do advise people quite regularly on particular points for their plots.
You do work with our lovely Graham and Kate as well, don't you?
Yes, I do. Sometimes Graham will pass a query on to me, but we also do various workshops. There's one coming up on the 4th of September, where Graham does the police procedural stuff, Kate does the crime scene investigation stuff, and I sort of mop up odds and ends on body disposal, poisons, knockouts, firearms, whatever it might be.
Do you have a particular expertise then? So if you're going to advise someone, what would be your particular science expertise?
Well, I know quite a lot about poisons, so that might be one of them. But I'm pretty much a generalist, which means that I've done bits of biology, chemistry, even bits of physics. So I can understand a lot of the basic principles. So I can pick up a scientific paper on something, if it's an area I don't know a great deal about, and understand it and translate it, which is, I suppose, much of the job, really, making something that's fairly complicated understandable. I had a query the other day, a couple of days ago, on the origin of the universe and what happens after the Big Bang. Well, I could look it up, and it made sense to me, and I managed to give an answer which the inquirer seemed to want. I can hear you, yes, that's no problem. Well, funnily you should mention that. People ask, what is the most toxic substance known? And I think, just digging around, there is a particular strain of botulinum toxin, not the one I hasten to add that's used in cosmetic surgery, which is fearsomely lethal, and probably more so than the synthetic nerve gas type things like Novichok. But I mean, I suppose it's horses for courses. If you want something you can get hold of fairly easily, there are botanical poisons which you can get hold of. Extracting them from the plants does require a certain amount of chemical skill, but if you've done A-level chemistry, you can probably do some of that. Identifying the right plant requires a bit of skill, but there are things you can buy online, seeds and stuff, and grow up toxic plants from that. What you won't be able to do is knock up nerve gas in your cellar, not without killing yourself. And the same goes for extracting some of the more lethal plant poisons. I mean, ricin crops up in a number of novels, and of course did crop up on Westminster Bridge a couple of decades ago. It is extremely poisonous. Apart from the fact that making it is a terrorist offence, doing so without poisoning yourself is not that easy. So if you're writing a character which involves extracting, say, botanical poisons, then it does help if they know something about botany, chemistry, pharmacology, and so on. Well, yes, welcome back. The chief protagonist is DC Melanie Cotton. Her father was in the police, became a DCI. Her mother was killed on duty. So she has this strong urge to follow in their footsteps and, if you like, prove herself. So she might be considered slightly reckless. I suppose it's a criticism that so many police officers in crimes do something really stupid, like going into arrest or even talk to a suspect without letting anybody know where they are, and they leave their phone in the car or it runs out of charge. But if everybody behaved completely and totally sensibly, then there wouldn't be very many plots. So she can be a little bit reckless, but she's also brave, she's intelligent, she's got a dark sense of humor. She makes some rather gallows humor type cracks about the head which is found on the woman's doorstep. But she's got humanity as well. I mean, to prove that, she rescued a tortoise from a drug dealer's flat and now keeps it in her flat. So she's, I think, an interesting character, and people like her. She reports directly to a DS Jack Vaughan, who's he's been in the job for 20 odd years. I won't say he's jaded, but he's seen a lot. He's been injured in the line of duty. He's brave and solid, but he is a bit critical of her because he's worried about her because he doesn't want her to come to any harm. But he thinks she's a bit sort of pushy and over the top, perhaps. But he respects her and they get on all right. There are various other people at detective constable level, and bear in mind, in most investigations, it's the detective constables and the sergeants who do all the work. There's a chap who's keen on computers and a bit shy, but he fancies her like nobody's business. There's another guy with a new baby who's fairly sort of haunted by lack of sleep, and their DI, who's actually running the investigation, which is a bit unusual because it's normally a DCI, and there is a reason for this, which readers will find out, is a bit useless. She's good at admin, she's good at balancing the books and checking the expenses and going to meetings and so on. But her spark as a street copper, if you like, has gone out of her. So she's a bit risk averse and hates the press, hates doing press conferences because they tend to rip her apart. So those are the key goodies. On the baddies side, I don't want to give too much away. We have a chap called Charles Osborne, who is involved in a drugs importation gang. He works with a guy called Campbell, who's a trafficker who left Glasgow in a hurry when the police were beginning to catch up with what he's doing. He was running a brothel, among other things. And there's a character who a lot of people like, but whether she's good or bad depends on your point of view. She was trafficked into Glasgow, became a sex worker on the streets, and the prologue to the book starts with her escaping, basically by robbing an affluent, rather unpleasant sounding punter, killing her pimp, changing her identity, and then going off to London, where with a variety of escapades she ends up working in the gang with the person who trafficked her. And obviously revenge is one of the things very much at the forefront of her mind. Too much more might give things away. What I will say is that when the police start investigating the gang, and they do the usual techniques of looking at bank accounts, looking at communications and talking to people, a bit of undercover work from one of them. They find out that the gang's earning rather more money than they'd expect from just trafficking drugs, because where they are is in a town I made up called Mexton, in somewhere in southern England-ish. And they're not selling in as many drugs or as much a profit-turning drug as you'd expect, given their lifestyle, the assets they own. So there is another source of income. And when they discover that, it's a bit of a shock to the police officers.
Yeah, don't give any more away.
I won't.
Yeah. Because it's well worth going to buy, everyone. So that's Fatal Trade. When does it come out?
Well, you can pre-order the ebook on Amazon from now. And there's a spoiler. If you go onto the Hobeck Books website, which is www.hobeck.net, you can download for free a novella, which is 3 stories featuring characters from Fatal Trade, and you can get that for free as a kind of taster, a bit of backstory. The paperback doesn't come out until the 14th of September.
We've got lots of people saying hello. So we've got Leslie, Tony, and Donna have all said hello.
Hello.
Donna, I feel like you're going to have questions for Brian. He's a science expert.
One thing I can't give you much advice on is post-mortems. I know a little bit, but the practical side of post-mortems gets a bit messy on the kitchen table, so I tend to avoid that.
There was a really good documentary, though. Not so much about post-mortems, but by the guy who I'm trying to remember his name. The guy who does the plastinized bodies.
Oh, Gunther somebody or other.
Gunther von Hagens.
Yes,
he did a show on Channel 4 about anatomy.
Yeah.
And he essentially did kind of post-mortems on TV.
Yeah.
Like showed you all the different systems, like the body systems.
Yeah, sure.
And things, which is, if you're not squeamish, is a really interesting watch.
Yeah, there's a number of books. I mean, I think Dame Professor Sue Black's books, Written in Bones and All That Remains, are tremendous. She's a very humane sort of person. She's an anatomist anthropologist rather than someone who'll be looking for cause of death and poisons and stuff like that. But in terms of her sort of respect and fascination with the human body, they're very good reads, her books.
So before I get on to the other questions, I'm just going to prompt everyone who's watching to go and have a look at our charity auction that has started today for Red Kite Academy. Luckily, there's characters in both Rob Scraggs and Kath Middleton's books up for bidding on, and a chance to get a mug like this.
Right.
As well. If people go and look at the ones pinned in the announcements, and it's a really good cause. So go and have a look. Make the school a lot of money.
Very worthy cause.
It is. It's a special school in Corby. It's really good. So Sam says, what kinds of questions do you get asked advice on the most? You've touched on that a little bit, haven't you, about poisons and things?
Yeah, it varies quite a lot. I mean, I suppose the first time I ever do anything like this to help the BBC blow up a toxic waste tip for a TV series called Jute City by Davy Kane, but that was when I was an environmental consultant. But I think the first time I dropped Peter James an email because I really liked one of his books, and the way that one of the female characters wasn't just a sort of simpering victim, but she fought back, and I thought that was great. And I said, well, I do science. If there's anything I can help you with, let me know. And he asked me about knocking someone out with ketamine, which I found out, gave us some information, got an acknowledgement in the back of the book, and I think just carried on doing that kind of thing, especially once I got the website up. So the sort of things I've been asked about, can you tell whether a limb's been amputated before or after death? Well, yes, you can. Can you distinguish between 2 sources of DNA in a same sample? Yes, if you've got the right software and one's not swamped by the other. Best ways of disposing of a body in an old Victorian house. What else was there? how long does it take to get a DNA result? What sort of medicines could poison a child? That's a rather grim one, I'm afraid. How long does it take for fabrics and bodies to dispose under various conditions? What else? Oh, I helped Zoe Sharp blow up a barn with diesel and fertilizer once. Great thriller writer. So yeah, it's right across the board, really. Oh yeah, somebody wanted to know how to set fire to a barge on a sort of time delay without any clever equipment, which again I could help with. What else? Oh yeah, a more recent one is what about residues of fentanyl post-mortem? Can you find them? And you know, if someone's been buried for a year, would you still find them? What you find, in fact, is a breakdown product rather than the chemical itself. But yes, things like that.
We were talking before, weren't we, when we recorded the promo about picky readers?
Oh, so, yeah, Stephen King has a phrase in his book. Again, it's paraphrasing, but there are a load of picky ass readers whose goal in life is to pick up authors on mistakes. And I have to say, some things do irritate me where people get things very wrong. And what tends to happen with some things is that the mistakes are passed down the generations, you know, because if you think back to some of the Golden Age thrillers, you get someone, a bit of chloroform on a rag pushed over their face and they fall asleep and they wake up a couple of hours later or something. And everybody thinks that's what chloroform does. Unless, of course, you've read Linda Stratman's brilliant book on chloroform. Because if you're trying to anesthetize somebody with chloroform surgically, it takes about 5 minutes, and you've got to keep the stuff fully in someone's system for them to stay asleep. So if you take the mask, whatever it is, away very quickly after, they'll wake up. They certainly won't be staying asleep for hours on end. And I think, again, there have been other cases. There's one book I read where somebody was in the back of a van and been on a long journey, kept anesthetized by a mixture of gases which would be used for surgery. But the trouble is, anesthetists are very highly trained. They must do 8 years training, something like that, to be fully qualified. And much of their job is not so much keeping people asleep, but keeping their heart working. So you can't just pump stuff into the back of a van and hope that the person will either stay asleep or stay alive. So again, things like that do jar a bit. I mean, I know you have to take liberties. It's a plot, you know, it's a story, it's not reality. But it would be nice if people checked up on a few things. And if chloroform was that, you know, easy to knock people out, I think I'd have been on the floor of the lab on more than one occasion.
Good point. My big bugbear, because it's what I studied, is DNA. So if something goes wrong with that, that's an it for me. There are authors I have stopped reading because they have made a really glaring mistake.
Yeah, I mean, people do make mistakes inevitably. If you just read fiction and then more fiction and don't actually understand it or talk to somebody who does, you can make these errors. And I suspect in some cases, I have to say, that some of the errors I've come across are more the editor mucking things around rather than the writer. I suspect that does happen occasionally. Because, you know, writers aren't stupid. They do try and get things right. And there is this drive for accuracy for so many writers. And I'm not dismissing writers as a tribe who are careless. They're not. The vast majority are very, very careful, but mistakes do slip through.
Oh, so Sam wants to know how far into the future you've thought about future books, fiction or non-fiction.
Sorry, what was that? What kinds?
She says, how far into the future?
What came first, revising or writing?
No, she said, how far into the future have you thought about future books, fiction or non-fiction? So what are you writing next?
Right, I'm getting an echo there. I don't know if everybody else is. Well, I've got the second Mel Cotton, novel in a draft form. It's being looked over at the moment before it's in a fit state to send to the publisher. And I have a third one, which I'm working on, about 30,000 words, which will be about a serial poisoner. So that's a subject I find, you know, quite easy to research, I think. Do you want me to pick up on some of these comments coming down the side here?
Yeah, we can do. And do you want me to see who said the one about which came first for you, Brian?
What came first? The advising came first. Yeah.
That was Lucy.
Yeah. So yeah, that was the first thing I started doing. I didn't think I could write fiction at that point, but I could help with my science knowledge. It was sort of giving something back to a community which I got so much enjoyment from. So that was the thing which came first. But contact with all these writers and reading stuff, and that, I thought, yeah, maybe have a go. I did a few short stories, which didn't exactly trouble any of the big prize givings, but they were fun. And then I thought, well, as I said, when I won that competition for the first opening line, I thought, well, yeah, let's get on with it. Actually write a novel. But yeah, I will be doing that. Whether the publisher will want a second edition of the crime writing science book in a few years' time, I don't know. That's obviously up to them and up to the market. It's aimed at not just people who write crime, but people on creative writing courses. I gave a lecture at the University of the West of England when it came out, and about half the audience were on the forensic science course and the other half on the creative writing course. And I got a nice bit of feedback on Amazon from somebody who said it really helped them when they were doing their creative writing. So, if someone wants a revised edition, then I'd gladly do it, because things do move on, especially in areas like DNA. A poison is a poison, but I suppose new things end up being used nefariously from time to time, which is worth mentioning.
Yeah, I studied DNA, and my textbooks were out of date before I finished my degree.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
They were just, completely gone. So, what drew you into studying science?
When I was about 9, somebody gave me a few chemicals from their chemistry set, and I started fiddling around with them, mainly because I like the pretty colours you got when you dissolve potassium permanganate or copper sulfate in water. A friend of mine who was a couple of years older was also interested in chemistry. So when I went to secondary school, obviously I did that, and I did chemistry, physics and maths for A-level to go off to university. But I'd always been interested in wildlife, whether it was washing butterflies, going to the zoo, keeping lizards and newts as pets, and so on. Things like that I was very keen on. And during the late 60s, early 70s, of course, the environmental movement came into the fore. I was an active member of Friends of the Earth and acted as their pollution consultant for a while. And I did a teaching certificate in biology, thinking that would be useful. So I'd got a mixture of odds and ends there. But I actually got my degrees at the Open University, or through the OU, partly by working in a pharmacy lab analysing drugs. And I was amazed at the sort of courses they ran. You could do a degree covering a whole range of issues. You could do some formal ecology if you've got some biology in your background. You could do chemistry at a level which got you into the Royal Society of Chemistry, which I did. And you could do various technological things like energy systems and mining and minerals and the Earth's resources. So all these things combined to form the kind of degree which covered environmental issues, which is what I was interested in particular at that point. And then, I started working for the OU, teaching science and environment courses, and did more courses because they're just fascinating. So I did a genetics course, which of course is pretty crusty in history by now. We've still got the same number of chromosomes, or most of us, but the fine details, I don't think they'd even discovered DNA profiling when I did that course, a long way back. So I've got this sort of general background in science, and I've always found it fascinating. I did a lot of home experiments with chemicals, which I think terrified my mother. And when one of the local lads at school blew up a phone box, I sort of rather gave that one a miss and solved the chemicals. But I was still keen in the subject, still went off to study it. So that's what my sort of science interest, really. I still read popular science books of various sorts.
Yeah, I do. I like to dip into ones that are things that I don't study, though.
Yeah.
So I kind of like physics ones and things like that.
Yeah, I never really got to grips with quantum physics and so the more abstruse sort of string theory and things like that. I think probably my weakest area is mathematics. I got it for A level, which was enough, but all the complicated stuff you had to do to check out eigenvalues and things there. Stick to creatures and chemicals.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Maths is not my forte either.
Yeah.
It's where I did biology.
Yeah. Sam asked, is there anything I wouldn't advise on? Yeah, if somebody said, how do I murder somebody and then get rid of the body? Well, I'm not going to give somebody a recipe to commit a crime. All the material in my book is available to people who know where to find it. And there are things like, one of the things I don't do is give the recipe for TATP or details of how to get ricin out of castor bean seeds, or I don't know, coniine from hemlock or anything like that. Simply because it would be irresponsible to do it. You'd either get some idiot trying it and poisoning themselves, or somebody succeeding and poisoning, or in the case of TATP, blowing somebody else up. The terrorists know where to find this stuff. They don't need a crime writer to tell them where to find it. So I have to be very careful in what I put in the book. And there are actually legal issues too. And this is perhaps a bit of a warning to crime writers. Under a recent act, it is an offence to even look up material that could be of use to terrorists. It's long been an offence to publish or possess it. So if you were to give a detailed recipe in a crime novel of how to make something like TATP, you'd be committing a serious offence and could be looking for a long stretch in Belmarsh if you weren't careful. There is a reasonable excuse clause in the Act, which would cover, I guess, journalisms and obviously academics looking stuff up. Whether it covers crime writing, I suppose it depends on who you're published by. If your name's Peter or Val or Mike, you might get away with it. If it's Ahmad or Paddy or Anwar or something, you might not.
So this might be Lucy as well. She said, what's your favourite scientific death that you've read or even advised on, and why?
I don't know. I think if you want to look at ingenious ways of killing people, I think some of the locked room mysteries are good. And going back into the early era of sort of scientific crime fiction, some of the things in the Dr. Thorndike books, he's a sort of almost a contemporary of Sherlock Holmes, but uses a lot more science and forensic stuff in his stories. But Mike Craven, M.W. Craven, is very ingenious in some of the ways he kills people or is planning to kill people, I can tell you that. So I'd look out for some of those, yeah.
Yeah, he has I don't know if it's in a short story or in one of his novels, where he has like a locked room mystery where someone dies in the bath by being sent a flickering GIF.
Yes, that's right. Somebody who has epilepsy and it triggers a fit. That is very ingenious. I'm not a neurosurgeon, so I'm not sure how well that would work, but I'm sure he's done his research. So yeah, I think that's a very clever one.
I'm not a neurosurgeon, but I am an epileptic, and it would work.
It would. Right.
Yeah, it would work. I personally really hate it when people send me flickering messages.
Well, that's typical of Mike to get it right. You know, he does that.
Yeah, it's a problem, and people don't think about it. It happens a lot. I get loads at Christmas that are like flickering messages and things. I'm like, please don't send me these.
Yeah, it's just inconsiderate, to say the least.
And that's my favourite scientific death, I think. It's genuinely interesting.
I mean, there are people make up poisons and include sort of poisons which don't work and that. I think another perhaps myth to lay to rest is the undetectable poison. I think if the stuff's there, people can find it by and large, unless you've obviously incinerated or cremated the corpse. But if you find a corpse and it's been poisoned, if you know where to look and what to look for, then you can generally find it. when Georgy Markov was killed with the ricin in the pellet, which was fired not from an umbrella but from something else, they didn't actually find traces of ricin left, but they deduced from the amount of poison which he must have absorbed that it had to be a particularly toxic material. Then they looked at the effects on the body and said, right, this is pretty much certain ricin. And of course, when they found somebody else had been shot with a ricin pellet which hadn't actually released its load, that confirmed it. The trick, I suppose, is to stop them looking. If you do use a substance which doesn't produce very obvious symptoms, I'm talking what atropine does. People can tell if someone's been poisoned by atropine if they see them fairly quickly afterwards. But if there's no suspicion, they won't look for something, because someone comes in dead, maybe it's a drug overdose, they'll do a routine screen of a number of substances. But the more obscure things takes a long time to get the results back. It's not like on Silent Witness where you get them, 10 minutes later. It requires a lot of complicated chemistry, a lot of complicated processing, sample preparation, and so on. So it's not just a question of taking a blood sample, squirting it in a machine and getting a thing saying, this is N-methyl 4-hydroxy, whatever it might be. It doesn't work like that. Yeah, they can pick up diamorphine or morphine and monocetyl morphine from a body quite easily, and they'd find fentanyl fairly easily, because that's the sort of things they normally look for. But something a bit more obscure, they might not.
Sam asked if you had a favourite poison.
I think you asked me that as well. I
asked you that, yeah.
Yeah. I don't think I would say there's a favourite one. I think aconite is one which, and Agatha Christie's been through a whole load of these, of course. Aconite is one which is probably not too difficult to get hold of if you know what plants to use. And you wouldn't necessarily get necessarily find it spotted if you report to hospital the symptoms, or if you're actually found dead with it. So yeah, that's a tricky one, I think. I hesitate to go for something which requires a lot of serious chemical processing, because it's not credible for your average villain to do it. I mean, bear in mind that most murders aren't detailed, planned operations and that, but they're often done on the spur of the moment whenever a weapon happens to come to hand, whether it's a bottle or a brick or whatever it might be. So that the poisoner who goes planning things out is unusual. I know I'm going to write about one, but and there's actually, if you look at the Crime Writers Association magazine Red Herrings, which has just come out, there's a long article on Neil Cream, who used strychnine to kill people. One thing I would say, actually, comparing today with Agatha Christie's day, you can't just waltz into a chemist or a pharmacist and say, right, I'd like some cyanide or some arsenic or some strychnine, just to get rid of an inconvenient rodent stroke husband. You can't do that anymore, because they're very tightly controlled. You need a license to possess many of these, and you won't get a license if anybody suspects that it's for nefarious purposes. So you can buy some stuff online. I think obviously you can get almost anything on the dark web, but I just tend to think that's a bit of a cop-out. Oh yeah, go to the dark web. Go onto the website serialkillersupplies.com or something, and no, that's cheating. If you're going to make it a credible thing, then go for something that's a bit more realistic, and don't just cop out with that.
Well, I think even like labs sort of have to have licenses for certain things now.
Yeah, well, that's right. You need a license for mercury, for nitric acid above about 6%. This is two things. It's the explosives precursors regulations, which means that things like strong hydrogen peroxide, various acids, nitric, sulfuric, and so on, above certain strengths, have to be, or they're either regulated or restricted. For some, you need a license. For others, if a seller thinks you're up to something no good, they're obliged to notify the Home Office. And it's partly to stop people making explosives, but also a whole range of poisons as well. I mean, mercury, which falls into both camps, you can make explosives and you can poison people with it. It gets salts. Again, you won't be able to get hold of that. And when I was a kid, you could buy all sorts of things by mail order from chemical suppliers for home chemistry and the like, including little bottles of mercury, which you could play with. Not a good idea. It's absorbed through the skin and you can breathe it, but you can't do that anymore. And, you know, quite right, really. I mean, some countries are much more lax. I think in America, certainly some states, you can buy all kinds of horrible things. But over here, not easy. I think what a writer can do is find something nasty in the woodshed, because obviously there's still in various parts of the country, I'm sure, outlawed pesticides and things like, well, I mean, arsenic and cyanide were used as pesticides back in the 20s and thereabouts. So yeah, there will still be some around if you know where to look. I bought a small house in Bristol once and found all sorts of horrors in the shed: DDT, dieldrin, pesticides that had been banned for 10 years or more.
Wow. Sam says a writer says cordite, and your response is?
Yeah, if your novel's set in the 50s or earlier than that, cordite, yes. But it's not used anymore. They use much more effective, controllable, stable propellants, which is you don't actually call them explosive in a cartridge, but what you want is something that will burn very quickly, but in a gradual manner, to push the bullet out the barrel smoothly. And cordite did that, but, you know, it was made of things like nitrocellulose, nitroglycerin, one or two other things. A bit crude, but for mass production, for fighting a couple of wars, yeah, it worked, but unsophisticated. So I think in Dr. No, they talk about the bloke in the lift smelling cordite on James Bond's clothes as he has just been firing it on the range. Yeah, that might work. They were possibly still using it in the 50s. But if you talk about anything contemporary and the smell of cordite, and or even in things like fireworks, no. What you can smell is either propellant, or in the case of sort of fireworks, it's effectively black powder, the old gunpowder with variations.
True. Sam said, how realistic is a disappearing weapon such as death by icicle?
I suppose it depends on the temperature. I mean, if you smack somebody over the head with a large piece of ice and it then melts, then yes, you probably still have blood and DNA somewhere in the pool of liquid. But yeah, that can work. What was it I read? I think it was a Golden Age thing where somebody fired an icicle at somebody from an air gun or something like that sort. But my feeling there is that the heat of the compressed air would probably melt half the icicle before it did much damage. Whether you can get a sharp enough point on an icicle to penetrate someone's heart is a problem. But I can well believe that an icicle falling from height and landing point first on someone's head could possibly crush the skull. Certainly could do you a lot of damage. So yeah, it's one of those slightly tricky ones. I tell you what was nonsense. There was a Golden Age story where somebody took an icicle in a thermos flask into a Turkish bath and then just stabbed somebody. Well, I can't see that working at all.
Fair enough. I like the one that, is it Roald Dahl does, where she kills him with a leg of lamb.
And then eats it. Yeah, that cropped up in that John Waters film, Serial Mom, with Kathleen Turner bumping off people who returned videos without winding them back and doing various other things. And she hit somebody with a frozen leg of lamb and killed him. And then when the detective came round, she served it up for dinner and fed him with the evidence. But that's John Waters' black comedy for you.
Donna wants to know what your favourite aspect or speciality of forensics is. She's studying a forensics degree.
Well, I suppose I'm basically a chemist and a biologist, so I did do a short, specifically forensic course with the OU, in fact, a little while back. I think rather than having a specialism, I have a general understanding of a broad range of topics. And if, as I said earlier, I think if I don't fully understand it, I can find it out and translate it into something that's more sort of digestible for either my readers or for authors who want some help.
Um,
My laboratory experience has been in chemical analysis. That was quite a long time ago. But I've used some of the techniques which people do use, only with probably much cruder instruments than they use these days. It's very high tech in the laboratory these days. I did like the setup in that TV drama Traces, which I think Val McDermid was involved in, and one of the forensic pathologists, whose name I cannot pronounce, but it's an Irish name, and she's extremely good. Nick McDiarmid or something.
No, I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Mine, Donna, would be in sort of DNA fingerprinting or virology.
Yeah.
My two kind of special interests in science, I would say. So back to your writing in general. What's the most recent? This is Sam's favorite question. What's the most recent scene that you've written? No spoilers.
The most recent scene. I have a detective who's been sent undercover, looking at this, investigating a murder, basically. And it's one of these strange things where she was tied to a chair and was trying to escape. But then I realized, or my wife pointed out, that there was a similar scene in Fatal Trade. So I've now got to find a different way of getting her to, first of all, be incarcerated by the villains, and then escape using ingenuity and just in time. I think it might well be a broom cupboard, but I'm still working on that.
I once worked somewhere, I don't know if this is a story for online, where they shot a supply teacher.
They shot or shut?
Shut.
Okay.
Not shot. That could have happened as well. But they shot a supply teacher in a cupboard and they were in there for a good half a day before they were discovered.
Good grief. What sort of cupboard was this? Because it can't have had much in the way of shelves.
No, I don't know. I think it was like a store cupboard. It was like a lockable one.
Yeah. Yes, that's the sort of thing I have in mind vaguely.
It
has to be something you can get out of without trying to, shooting the lock off. Actually, shooting the lock off something is a pretty stupid idea, because if you fire a pistol at a metal lock, there's a fair chance the bullet will come back and hit you. You could sort of shoot a series of holes through a wooden door all the way around it, but I'd rather guess that your captors would hear you, and it's probably easier just to use brute force. Whether you can pick it with a hat pin is something I never tried, but I know you can pick locks with bits of wire.
Yeah, they always say that, don't they? I've always wanted to see someone actually do it in real life. Can you pick a lock with a hair clip?
I think it depends on the lock. There are videos on YouTube on picking locks which you can have a look at. And it's certainly easy with a Yale type rim lock to open it with a credit card, as long as it hasn't got a dead latch on it. You can just flip it back, and I've done that and I've been locked out, that kind of thing. But if it's a more complicated lock, then you do take a bit more skill. And then you can, what was I saw recently? It was a film I saw recently where the guy had a little, with the Yale lock, you need something to turn the lock, the inside bit, and then something to jiggle the little tumblers around. And he had a little metal thing which went sort of twang, 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 and quite quickly opened it, which I think was quite credible.
Did you, going back to your book, did you decide the cover and the title yourself?
Which one, Fatal Trade or the crime one?
Fatal Trade.
I thought of that as being a reasonable title and floated it to the publishers, and they liked it, because obviously initially there's the trade in drugs, which cost people their lives in a number of ways, clearly. The cover, well, that refers to the head in the box on the woman's doorstep. So I sort of suggested that, and Hobeck are really good. They consult with their authors on the look of things on the cover. And the first one they came up with, it was too dark. You couldn't actually see it was in a doorway. So they went back and they changed it, and we came up with something which everybody liked. And people do seem to appreciate it. I think I've read of other publishers who just sort of what was it? Somebody was saying that they set a book in springtime and the cover had snow on it, or maybe it was vice versa, because somebody at the publishing company, one of the big ones, thought that looked better, but it bore very little relation to the contents of the book. But even in the olden days, I mean, Reginald Hill wrote a book, I can't remember which one it was, but it talked about someone being found dead in Thornton Heath. Well, Thornton Heath is between Streatham and Croydon in South London. It was something that was meant to be Thornton Dale in Yorkshire, but presumably the publishers or the person who wrote the blurb lived near Thornton Heath and got it muddled up. I don't think Reginald Hill would have let that by if he'd spotted it. A very good writer, actually, one of the people who sort of inspired me.
I'd imagine very different places as well.
Yes, indeed. It was just carelessness, you know, get any idiot to write the blurb, as it were. But no, I think if you're working for a publisher which cares, and I dare say, it was a debut novel for me. I was very much in their hands. If you've got a reputation, if you're someone like Peter James, then obviously you've got much more say than someone who's just signed up for the first time. But it was lovely the way that they are inclusive and respect authors and obviously doing their best to promote them.
So this, because you're a debut author, it might be an interesting question. One of our favourite group questions is, what are your most memorable moments as an author?
Well, getting offered a contract, I think, was the first thing. I mean, winning that competition was nice. Getting a very constructive critique from Louise Voss it built my confidence up a lot and made me think, well, yeah, I can submit this to publishers. I thought about self-publishing, but it seemed to require sort of design skills and things which I didn't have. I'm not an artist by any means. And to be picked up by a publisher which would do it as an ebook and a paperback was absolutely delightful. So I think that was one of the big things. But then, on a sort of perhaps a smaller scale, occasionally you write a scene and you think, yeah, that works, or that pulls at the heartstrings, or that's exciting. And moments like that are really nice, especially if someone else agrees with you. If they say, well, that's rubbish, that wouldn't work, then that's a different matter. But
yeah. Would you write in other genres?
I don't have the imagination to write fantasy and science fiction. I love Terry Pratchett. He's an amazing writer. But I could never write like him or conjure up the ideas that he has. I'm not particularly keen on horror. I know there are some writers, some extremely good writers, who write both horror and crime, but it's not really my thing. And I don't think I'm really qualified to do a sort of chick lit romance kind of thing. Is that a pejorative term? I don't know. I think it's one that's still in use.
I think it's okay. I think you can still use chick lit.
Right, yeah, but I suppose it's a question of writing what you know, whether it's science or the genre which you read most in. I think if you look at the Fatal Trade and the next one coming along, they're police procedurals. They're not mysteries. I've written a couple of sort of locked room type short story things. I think I put a couple of them on the CWA website and during lockdown when they were asking for people to donate stories to cheer people up. So I've done a few sort of straightforward mystery type things. But the Fatal Trade and the follow-up they're part thriller, part police procedural. If all you had was people in briefings and saying, yes, Gov, I got the fingerprints, I think it would be a bit dumb. We have the detectives going out and getting into danger. And in the follow-up, there's a fairly dramatic one involving Mel as well. But the subsequent one, which will be a serial poisoner one, there's going to be more of a mystery, I suppose, and more conventional detection, if you like. But I love locked room mysteries, and if I can come up with another idea for one, then I'll certainly write it as a short story.
Great. We have got 2 minutes left. So do you want to just remind everybody about your books to finish us off?
Yeah, the first one is Crime Writing, How to Write the Science. It's published by StudyMates. It's available through all normal outlets. You can order it from Waterstones or the Big River, as they say. And independent bookshops can get it. They can order it because it's through conventional distributors. Fatal Trade comes out on the 14th of September. Pre-order it on Amazon now because they're handling the ebook side of it. And it'll also be available as a paperback, which you can get through obviously Amazon, but also any reasonable bookshop should be able to order it through a conventional distributor. And the next one's due, I think, in hopefully Easter.
Marvellous. Well, keep us up to date for when the next one comes out.
Certainly will.
And thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Well, thanks very much for having me. It's been great fun. If there are any other questions I've missed, then I'll answer them through the website or whatever.
Yeah, it will stay pinned. So thanks, and hopefully